Hello, this is Michael Denon, Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning and Dean of the Division of Undergraduate Education here at UC Irvine. And this is Conversations with the Vice Provost, where I sit down with members of our community to discuss topics of interest to the students, the faculty, the staff at UCI, the larger Orange County and California community, and, dare I say, the entire world. So it's exciting today to have with me Lars Walton. Lars is our Associate Chancellor and Chief of Staff. And welcome, Lars.
Thanks for having me. I'm still sitting in my actually in my bedroom right now, so it feels a little weird to be welcome. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I feel it weird because I look over to you on the screen as if that's like meaningful.
Yeah.
And so to the Zoom audience, I'm just looking randomly off into space. Well, our first question is, I gave your title, and I think that's something, when I first became Vice Provost and Dean, that was the number one question I got from students is, what's a dean? What's a vice provost? And so I thought it would be fun to chat a little bit about what's a chief of staff. I think that's something our students would be interested in.
Yeah. So, this is my second tour as a chief of staff. Prior to this, I was chief of staff to Tim White, who I don't know when this is airing, but Tim White, when I was with him, was the chancellor of the Cal State system, the 23 campus system, akin to our now president, Drake. And so I was with Tim for, almost 12 years, a little over that, and was his chief of staff when he was at Cal State, and then came here as Chancellor Gilman's chief of staff. And so when I was with Tim, we used to joke all the time that it was chief of stuff. It was like literally anything that was on Tim's plate that didn't need to be there just became mine, and it would range whatever the topics were. And so it's a little bit of that. I mean, I joked with you earlier. It's a bit of the potpourri category in Jeopardy, where it's a little bit of anything. I mean, anything can go wrong on any given day, and that kind of falls on my plate. And it changes. It's a really it's a close relationship with what I call my principal. So when I was with Tim, it was a very close relationship. I didn't hold anything back. And again, same with Chancellor Gilman, with Howard. I mean, there's nothing that I hold back with him. I'm very upfront about, faults that I see of the campus or with him or where I can help. But I mean, same with me. He'll bounce things off of me and I can share them with him. He jokes that, people ask him how he's able to get a good night of sleep. And he says, well, it's because I've got a chief of staff who he takes the call. Right. So, at the start of the pandemic, it was really interesting. I mean, I look at it, for many people, the pandemic started feeling real in March. For most of us in leadership, it felt real in January. I mean, I was on a hike in Peters Canyon on a Sunday, and Howard texted me and said, hey, did you read this New York Times article? Looks like there's this virus in China. Can you make sure we're on top of it? And it was like, okay. So I got home that night and, had a text out to Vice Chancellor Goldstein and Vice Chancellor Banks. And the next day we started planning. And, January 20th, I think, was our first day that we really had a team together looking at this, pandemic. And that was all built off of, Howard read an article and was like, hey, can you start putting together a response for this? So it's interesting.
It is. And I think one of the things for students, we're very proud, and I think rightfully so at UCI, of our students that are first generation, first in their family to go. And we're, half of our students are that. And one of the things I've learned in this position is there's a much broader spectrum of careers and jobs and activities out there than they ever even imagine. Mm-hmm. And I know certainly my chief of staff, Jennifer Aaron, this job would not happen without her. And she had a particular interesting route there. I don't think in college she was sitting there majoring going, oh, I'd like to be a chief of staff for someone. Sure. I'm taking a guess, Lars, that was not your thought in college either.
No, not really. So I had a kind of interesting route. I did my undergrad at Berkeley and joined I was in the UC-DC program and went out to DC, really involved in politics. Interned at the White House during my UC-DC time, and then worked for a member of Congress, Chris Cox, who represented actually the campus 15, 16 years ago. And when Chris left Congress, I was running his campaign and was actually in Orange County at the time, and was kind of like, okay, I make this like shift. What do I do? I was a poli-sci major, didn't know what to do. And so I thought, like all good, washed up congressional staffers, I'd go into lobbying. And so there was a couple of positions open. I think there was one for Irvine Ranch Water District, maybe one for OCTA, and then there was one at UCI in federal relations. And I kind of looked at it and was like, okay, I knew the portfolios that those places had from my time in DC. And I knew the UCI one was the most interesting. I mean, just the breadth of a university compared to talking about roads every day or talking about water every day. The institution is so big, research, teaching, employment. It's pretty amazing what the University of California does. So that's what brought me here, 15 years ago. And then from there, I went, Irvine, I went over to Riverside, and that's where I met Tim and did federal and more broadly community relations for him. And then he was one who pushed me to go back to school. Got my doctorate at UCLA, and then went on with him to Cal State. So it was really, interesting. When I left college, when I graduated college, I never thought I would be back on a campus except for, a football game.
Right.
So,
well, I think one important lesson for our students, which I try and remind them of, is it's good to be planning, but it's almost more important to be alert to opportunities.
Sure.
Right. And I think that's something many of us have experienced. Even myself, who's kind of had that traditional route to the professorship. I was the typical standard undergrad, grad, postdoc professor, largely because I didn't know what else to do. And they kept accepting me at the next stage.
Yeah.
But as a professor, I ended up actually doing TV only because I took a chance on an opportunity, which I, never planned for things like that. And it sounds like you had some great opportunities along the way by staying open to options.
Yeah. And just kind of like followed into, I have a friend from high school I still keep in touch with, and he goes, Lars, you always kind of like fall backwards into stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not really looking one way or the other. It's just things come up. And yeah, I was really happy to come back to Irvine. It was good for me to get out, spread my wings a little bit. I didn't have to move, but, I got around to a few other campuses, so learned a few things and then came back. So that was work for me. Just recently with the chancellor, we also did the celebration of service, the staff service awards.
Right.
And man, I actually love also hearing the people who have grown their whole careers here at UCI. We had someone who celebrated 50 years working at the institution. That's pretty amazing to think.
And the university needs people like that because they're like the continuity.
Absolutely.
It's an awesome
Absolutely.
feature. So speaking of that in the university and everything we do, I think we often forget that the university really is this interesting interplay between the faculty, the staff, and the students. Many of us interact like faculty. We're actually mostly interacting with the students. Obviously, we interact with the staff, but a large focus is on the students. Students will often interact with both, but in very sort of siloed ways. And I would figure from kind of your perspective, the vantage point of near the top of the university, if not at the top, you really get to see the interactions of those three groups and that interplay. Does that come directly into your role, or is it more something that you just get to see and watch, or how does that work out with what you do?
Sure. I think, as you're talking about it, it really is like a three-legged stool. You've really got to have, the strong, robust faculty. Obviously, a university isn't what it would be without students. And then the staff is kind of like that leg that you don't notice, but is really dependent to keep the whole stool level. And so I kind of see that interplay of all three. Most of my relationships on campus are with staff. And that's where I kind of get kind of what's going on, a little bit of the feedback, the non kind of formal communication, just keeping my ear to the ground. But then certainly with the faculty as well. A lot of the faculty communication is obviously through the provost's office, but there's a lot that I try and pick up on. The faculty of the UC system are almost the governing board for a chancellor. A chancellor's got to keep, a private university, a president or a chancellor is always worried about keeping their governing board happy. at a UC, I think a chancellor really needs to be on top of, have the pulse of the faculty. And so part of my role is just to keep that pulse, make sure, we're always working on shared governance and things like that. And any of those decisions trying to pop in my head, hey, do I need to make sure reaching out to the provost's office so they can begin consultation with the faculty? So, I think that's part of it. And then the students, it's tough. Part of the reason I left the Cal State to come back to a campus was really to have that connection with the students. I don't have it as much. Occasionally Professor Beckman in political science asked me to come in and chat a little bit about my experience. I love that. I love interacting with students, or if the students going to the UCDC program, but then also just going to an athletics competition. going to a basketball game or something like that. Just feeling that pride that you sense through the students really keeps us going, I think, in administration. So that's the kind of the interplay that I see from the chancellor's office.
Lars, that's great. And I do have to re-emphasize something you said. As the dean of the Division of Undergraduate Education that oversees our UCDC program, I'm glad that you've worked that in at least twice now into the interview. Right. And I think it's those opportunities when we think about it for our students, just to build on, right, that the major public research university is so good at doing is leveraging our vast resources. You mentioned it earlier, being one of the largest employers in Orange County. That creates opportunity, I think, also for the students to have that larger set of faculty, that larger staff, that larger engine around it. And UCDC is just one of those cool examples. And I'm glad you're still an advocate and ambassador for that program.
Sure. Yeah.
And you're great proof that you can do UCDC and you don't have to end up in politics, right?
Yeah. No, I think that probably makes my parents, happy that I didn't stay in DC and still end up in politics. So.
Now, you also mentioned something else. This was not a question I prepped us for, but you've alluded to it. And I think it's useful to comment on briefly. Many people notice that we don't have a football team.
Yeah.
But yeah. I would argue, particularly with the Anteater, I think we do have deep pride in our sports here at UCI. And I think athletics does play an important role for our students. And we sort of shown in a way that you can do it without football. But that's just one poor person's experience who also happens to favor soccer over football, just to say. But sure. I'm curious, as someone who's been away, come back, been in the different places, do you have a reaction to that, or am I putting you on the spot?
No. I wake up, especially during this pandemic. I think I wake up every day and am thankful that we don't have a football program. I look at my colleagues at the other institutions and the challenges that they went through. it's just not simply that, you've got to put together a schedule or what's going on or what's happening in, the Power 5 conferences or whatever. For us, fortunate because we were able to set our own course in terms of athletics. Our campus finances are fine. We're not, big sports where, coaches are paid millions and millions of dollars and, and programs are so big, but we've got a lot of campus pride in there. So, I actually think we're in this very sweet spot of college athletics compared to our sister campuses and then also to the Cal State system. So yeah, keep it as it is. So, yeah. and we're undefeated. So in football.
Exactly. Well, I do have to share the little personal story as a Princeton alum. We have a great point of pride. Princeton lost the first ever college football game to what is now Rutgers, but was the College of New Jersey. So it's important to hold some record somewhere. So UCI is undefeated. The other school I'm associated with lost the first ever football game. So,
Yikes.
Yeah, exactly. Now, one other thing that I've noticed, and this is an interesting, more moment of the time situation. You hear the pundits say that people are losing trust in institutions, and that can be government, it can be businesses, and it is even universities. And there is, I think, a little bit of that. What's interesting, I don't know, I think you also see these reports, the AAU, which is the big association that we're part of the top research universities, when they recently did their own study last year, found that that AAU type universities, top public universities, actually still rank pretty high in the public trust, even if there's an overall decrease. I think, this is something I'm incredibly proud of to be at UCI. I think we are very unique, and Chancellor Gilman talks about it regularly, to be both a top 10 public research university, but then to have the number of first gen, the number of low income students, the number of, we're a Hispanic serving institution, we're an ANAPESI institution. So there's a level there, that a role we play, I think, that's perhaps unique among institutions, that can re-engage that trust of the public, rebuild it, and reconnect with the community. And I know Chancellor Gilman's been working on it, and so I assume you are involved in that effort as well. Is there something there? It's a very vague question, but is there something there, you'd like to comment on or point to?
Yeah, no, I think what it is I think the challenge with institutions broadly right now is their ability to perform on the goals that they set forth. So if you're a member of Congress and you're running for Congress, it's like, I'm going to change DC, or I'm going to do this. It's really challenging to actually perform on that goal. I think for us as an institution, we kind of have two parts. We are both a public good and a private good. So the private good piece is to the student, hey, listen, we're going to accept you. We're going to invest in you. We're going to put all of this effort into graduating you and making you a successful anteater, go out there and change the world. And so we've got that piece, and we're able to commit on that and do a really good job on that. The graduation rates, there's still room for improvement, but what we're able to do is pretty amazing at this institution. People try and slice and dice it at other institutions and say, well, because of our students, this is what our graduation rate should be. I think what a pride point for us is, we don't try and blame it on what our student circumstances are. We say, hey, listen, you're accepted at the University of California, Irvine. We're making a commitment to you. No matter what your background, no matter your circumstance, we're making a commitment to you to really make sure you get a quality education and graduate. And then you shift over to the public good. And that's really the challenge. I think that's the piece where there's the trust, is like, why should I, as a California taxpayer, pay into the state and make a difference? How is the institution going to make a difference in my life? And that's the challenge. I think institutions are really still having challenges with that. I think the University of California does a good job. Mostly, I think a lot of it is around our research, but we've also gotten really good about talking about, unfortunately, our product, which is our other product, which is our graduates. Our graduates are coming out and making really amazing differences in the state of California, in the nation, and globally. And so I think that's the piece where we've got to perform to the taxpayer. But it's challenging. As we went through the last recession, you really saw the who's paying for undergraduate education really level off. It's 50-50. Undergraduates through tuition, and then state basically subsidy through state appropriations. And so it kind of put this pressure on the institution of like, who do we perform to? Are we going to that private good or to the public good? And luckily for UC, I think a lot of other institutions had to really focus on the private good. UC, because we're not just a teaching institution, we also have research that's heavily federally state funded. We could really still keep our mission on the public good.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that distinction, Lars, between that public and private good, but also how they relate and connect with each other and how they play off each other. And I do think, one thing I've noticed, and as a returnee to UCI, I'm curious on your view of this. I think the community is finally starting to take notice and understand who we are. I'm one of those people. I've been here 23 and a half years. I've only been a professor at UCI. I've been at lots of other institutions. And to be frank, when I got here, as many people will know, we were still basically a commuter school. We were, to the degree, I know all UCs are equal, but to the degree that they are tiered, we were at the lower end of the tier, and now we're at the upper end of the tier. We do have a much more robust residential life for our students. I think we can safely describe ourselves as a residential college, though we still support and welcome the students that have to commute. But I think we're now making that last bit where the Orange County community is starting to really understand and embrace us. We had a national reputation. Ironically, I think almost before we had an Orange County reputation in some ways, except for those who are kind of in the know. Does that resonate at all?
Oh yeah,
Are you seeing that
absolutely.
happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you had, if you had been there, I think when I interviewed, when I was my first tour at UCI, I mean, one of the things I stated, I'm actually amazed I still got the job, was that I didn't apply to UCI as a high school student. I mean, simply, I think I applied back then, there was no Merced. I applied to 6 UCs and had no idea where Irvine or Riverside was. Now, mind you, I grew up in Northern California. And of course, those are the 2 UCs I've gone on to work for. But I really do think that now, I mean, I talk to people, where I grew up in Sonoma County, folks up there know, all about UCI. They know what's going on here. You go to national meetings, obviously, as you said, I mean, I do think what you just said, we had a national reputation and now we've really got more of a community understanding of the institution. And I actually think that the pandemic's been very interesting in that. I mean, some of the stuff we were doing at the front end, just were things that the other local institutions just could not do. No offense to a Chapman or a Fullerton, but I mean, the stuff we're doing right now in the pandemic is something that can only be done by a research institution.
No, I think that makes sense. And I think the other thing it's done, which I've had this experience in my life. So I went to Santa Barbara for grad school in physics before they were a top 3 or 5 physics department, but they were on their way. And what that's done for me is people now actually really understand and value and recognize what my degree means, even though I went to Santa Barbara prior to that national recognition. And I think for our Anteater Nation and all our alumni, it's a similar effect, right? The people who were the groundbreakers and the founders and out here before we had that reputation are now being proven very smart for having come here at that time.
Yeah, it was like you bought at the right return. It was like buying Berkshire stock 50 years ago. So
yeah, so it's kind of, I think that's something also for our current students to understand is the powerful sort of Anteater network they have out there, that these alumni are the top out there. They're the top in their field. So it's not just the current students that are the top, but it's our alumni now that are really a huge benefit for our students and the communities they're in.
Yeah, and that really, I mean, I think that's something that no institution can conquer fast. I mean, you can't age your alumni fast. There's no way. I mean, maybe the pandemic's aging us all faster than we used to age, but I mean, really, it takes, I mean, you think someone's graduating college, 22, 23, it's going to take 50 years for them to become major players in industry, to have set up legacies in corporations or communities. And so it just takes a little bit of time. I mean, that's like the one thing you can't fast forward is that alumni pace. So
yeah. And I think that's another transition we've made. We're just old enough now to see that happening, which is exciting. So all great stuff, Lars. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you about all this. To our listeners and viewers, thank you for listening and come back for more.
Thanks so much.